because of Halloween.
Forget me not. My older brother John used to have an imaginary friend named Mr. Chambers. Don't ask me where he got the name. Kids often defy explanation. His drawings showed Mr. Chambers as a little boy with long fingernails, like a bear. He was 4 at the time. We have a lot of home videos of John talking to Mr. Chambers, telling him about his day, and asking him questions. My parents thought it was so cute. I was a year old at this time, and don't have any memories myself of my brother spending time with this imaginary friend. When something is broken, as things in the path of a young boy often are, Mr. Chambers would often be the scapegoat. That got old pretty fast for my parents, and my parents told him to stop talking about his imaginary friend. On the night of my 4th birthday, I was woken by a sound of glass shattering downstairs. I crept slowly down the stairs and peeked around the wall of the landing into the kitchen to see what caused the sound. A hand was scrabbling through the hole busted in the glass at the inside of the door. My blood chilled, freezing me in place. Someone was trying to get into our house. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I needed something to protect myself. My 4-year-old logic led me to think that this man was here to get me, and the calling out to my parents would only speed my demise. I passed the burglar's flashlight reflected off a small knife left on the counter. I ran on my tiptoes to grab it, unheard over the click of the locks. As my hand closed around the handle, the click of the door closing to my right surprised me. He was right next to me. Could he see me? I didn't know, but I reacted with a fight response, closing my eyes and flailing with a knife at the burglar. I lost track of how many times I slashed at the man's leg, but his screech of pain told me I was hitting something. He blindly backhanded me, and I went down with a screech of my own.
I never killed a kid before, but you're really tempting me, he snarled, eyes venomous through his mask.
He grabbed a rolling pin, raised his arm to hit me over the head. The sound of a shotgun cocking was unmistakable. This time, it was his turn to freeze. His eyes locked in the light that had just appeared in the stairwell.
Put it down. Now.
He gulped and dropped the rolling pin without hesitation.
On the ground, scum. Hands behind your head.
I got up shakily as the man dropped to the ground and did as my father said.
Cops are on the way, but don't try anything.
John ran down the stairs to see what all the noise was about and froze, looking from the man and to my left. I wondered how an imaginary friend would be reacting to such a terrible experience.
Get back to bed, John. You shouldn't have to see this.
Get back to bed, John. You shouldn't have to see this. He obliged. Once the police arrived, they took the man away, and the officers took our statements and took some pictures, and then left, leaving only glass shards and blood stains on the wooden floor to remind us of what happened. My father took a deep breath and dropped his shoulders as his tension began to dissipate. He looked down at me, and, noticing my unwavering gaze out the window after the police car, just said, "Daniel?" He knelt beside me and put his hand on my shoulders. And put his hands on my shoulders. His eyes met mine. "Are you okay, Danny?" I nodded numbly. "You were very brave back there, Danny. It must have been really scary for you. You boys can sleep in our room tonight." I don't remember the rest of the night. We saw the burglar in court just weeks later. His name was Peter Johnson, a 26-year-old crack addict who had turned to burglaries to buy more drugs. He was even high when he broke in. He was scarred all over his arm, though I didn't think I'd cut him that badly. Peter glowered at me as I testified, rubbing his scars. His sentence was 15 years, and his eyes told me he had a longer memory than that. I can still remember the glare he gave me, all of us. We got a large dog, George, and an improved home security system, and learned to rest more easily. We nearly forgot about Peter Johnson. 2 years later, we were met with shocking news over the phone. Peter had escaped. My dad's mustache quivered like it was alive as he angrily said to my mother, "Remember how that scum looked at us at the end of the trial? He'll be back. We need to be on guard. Boys, if you see anything, tell us right away. We can't be too careful." Due to all our paranoia, we were surprised when our dog and alarm systems were silent, night after night. We had several false alarms as John would start screaming in the night because he heard something. This kept happening and my parents took him to a psychologist. I overheard my parents whispering about how he had said, "Mr. Chambers keeps telling me the noises aren't real, but I still get scared." He was 9 at this point. A psychologist suspected some sort of schizophrenia diagnosis and prescribed a low dose of antipsychotics to reduce the hallucinations. The fact that he still saw his imaginary friend tipped the scales to a more serious diagnosis. He slept well that night, and my parents breathed a sigh of relief. The very next night, though, disaster struck. Windows started breaking around midnight. The alarm went off. George was barking like crazy from John's room. It was chaos. We heard doors opening and closing and ran out of the house to Grandma's house. Dad hadn't seen anybody, but we all knew it was Peter Johnson, and he was dangerous. We were gathered in the living room and Mom was trying to reach the police. I suddenly remembered the barking I'd heard and realized George was still in the house. He could be hurt. Quietly, I slipped out the door into the garage. Peter had to be gone by now, and I had to know if our dog was all right. He needed me. I sidestepped the broken glass on the way into the house. The wind was chilly, but my fear was what made me quiver. It was so quiet. Every window was broken. I went up the stairs. The hallway was not any different, except things are actually more of a disaster up here. "George?" I eased open John's door. There he was. He wasn't moving. "No, George, no." Tears flooded my eyes as I ran to him. He was already cold. I was too late, and his blood was now figuratively and literally on my hands. He had been all cut up. I looked around the room to avoid looking at that awful sight. Scratch marks were gouged into all the walls, up, down, across, everywhere. Too high to be George's. An image of Peter Johnson's arm, all slashed open, flashed in my mind for a split second. Someone with a knife, or... I gasped involuntarily. Long fingernails. Claws. I looked down at George. I could see the blood trailed away from him up onto the wall. As my eyes moved upwards, I saw a message written in blood on the wall. A message from somebody who we had nearly forgotten. "Why won't you look at me anymore, John? Don't ignore your best friend."
Whenever my brother and I came home late for dinner, our dad would tell us about the hide-behinds. These creatures, he would say, would follow hikers as they walked through the woods. At the crack of a branch, you'd turn around, but there'd be nothing there. Then, out of the corner of your eye, you might see a dark shape sprint behind a tree. Soon, your paranoia escalates, and you're running through the woods. But there is no escape, he'd say. The hide behind would follow you until your heart stopped from the fright. And I believed him, the child that I was. For a while, I'd never stay in the woods for too long or too late, and I was never late for dinner. But I soon grew out of such fantasies. There were other real dangers of the woods to fear, getting lost or preyed upon by bears. The hide-behinds seemed so immature now. Yet every now and then when I'd linger in the woods after twilight, a dark shape darting behind a tree would catch my eye. For an instant, my heart would skip a beat. But I dismissed them as deer or simply paranoia. I didn't want to believe. I should have listened to my instincts. There's a reason people have an innate fear of the woods. There's a reason we feel like something is following us when we hike home after dark. Like my childhood nightmares come to life. I found myself lost in the woods one day as the sun went down. I walked as fast as I could through the thick woods, trying to get my bearings. No, that's the wrong way. I doubled back, just in time to catch a glimpse of something behind a tree. Perhaps that was the right way after all. I turn around and continue, faster. I look back, and there it is again. But this time, he lingers in the open before disappearing behind the trees. Now, I'm running. My heart races. The thorns tear at my legs. I need to go faster. I need to go on, but my legs won't run any further. So I crawl. I crawled through the thickets until my hands were bloody and raw. And when I could go no further, I prayed for it to be all over. I don't know how I survived that night, what willpower kept me going. But somehow, I evaded those terrible creatures until sunrise, and found my way back to civilization. It was a long while before I went back in the woods again. There's a reason people have an innate fear of the woods. These creatures, these incarnations of paranoia, have hunted man for as long as he walked in the woods. My advice to anyone in the woods after dark: don't look behind you.
I was camping with my wife one night on the Wakaiba River in Florida. It was a great day. We canoed in and pitched hammocks on some sweet gum trees on a small island in the center of the river. Built a fire, had dinner, and laid in the hammocks and watched the sun go down. Couldn't ask for a better night. At some point, we drifted off to sleep. I was sound asleep when I bolted upright in my hammock. It was absolutely silent, and the kind of dark that would make a coal miner uneasy. I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and I don't scare real easily. But I grabbed my flashlight and shined around the little island. Everything was okay. Then I shined it down on the ground. The island was absolutely crawling with carpenter ants, thousands, millions of them. They didn't really scare me. They're not particularly aggressive, but that many of them is unsettling to say the least. It was about this time that my wife woke up. I didn't know you could stand up in a hammock. And the scream she let out probably hurt some blue whale's ears in the Pacific somewhere. I kept telling her to calm down. They weren't going to bother us. I hoped. But that was it. Camp trip was over. She wanted out, and I mean right then, without delay. So I reached around and got a palm frond and lit it with the Zippo and used it like a flaming broom to sweep away the ants out of my way. Started packing up, keeping everything in the hammocks to keep the ants off. When I had it all packed, I went over and flipped the canoe upright. It was black on the inside. They had taken over our ride out. More screaming, mainly along the lines of, "Why did I let you talk me into this?" So I took another flaming broom and swept out the ants. Then got it in the water. I had to piggyback my wife to the canoe. It was real interesting, getting her in and not turning it over. Then I loaded the boat, took down the hammocks, and we headed up the river to where we put it in. Florida rivers are interesting places at night. Lots of gators and other shiny-eyed critters out and about. My wife would not help me paddle. She gripped my flashlight like a lightsaber and swung it from side to side as if she was fending off Darth Vader. We finally got to the launch and loaded up and went home. To this day, she still will not go anywhere near a canoe.
I grew up in a small town in New Jersey. It was senior year, and my friend Jack was in charge of setting up chairs for an assembly later that day. I got roped into helping him, but it wasn't too bad. I got to skip my 5th period math class. We eventually ran out of chairs, and one of the janitors gave us a big ring of keys and told us to get the rest out of the basement. Ever since I was a kid, I marveled at those key rings. With dozens of keys jangling together, they could take you anywhere. Jack made the mistake of letting me carry the keys down to the basement. While I was walking over to a stack of chairs, my foot hooked around the leg of a folding table, and I fell flat on my stomach onto the hard concrete, knocking the wind out of me. The keys skirted across the room and disappeared into a row of metal folding chairs. "Shit," I groaned, bringing myself to my knees and hoping I would be able to breathe correctly again soon. "You better find the keys," Jack warned from behind an armful of folding chairs. "I'm going to take these upstairs. I'll be back in a minute." Turning on the flashlight on my phone, I crawled around on my hands and knees on the dirty floor. Nothing. With a heavy sigh, I began to move some of the chairs out of the way to search along the edge of the wall. The keys were nowhere to be found. Just when I was about to give up, I saw a hole in the floor, about the size of 2 fists behind where a group of chairs had been. Not wanting to stick my hand into a filthy, strange hole in my school's basement, I set my phone on top of it and took a picture. The angle was awful, but in the corner of the frame, I could make out part of the keyring, which had caught on something jutting out from one side of the hole. Begrudgingly, I stuck my hand inside and fumbled around for a little bit until my fingers wrapped around the keys. As I was bringing my hand back up, I felt a stinging pain on the side of my thumb. I quickly pulled up the keys and wiped my hand off on my jeans, coating the keys and my hand in this thick gray mucus. I gagged and made a mental note to have Jack return the keys. I discovered that the pain I felt was from a thin, inch-long scratch running up the length of my thumb. I went to delete the picture on my phone when I noticed a blurry object resting at the edge of the photo. It seemed to be a tiny hand-like structure with a small palm branching off into 3 bony fingers, capped with razor-sharp claws. I figured I would take one more picture to prove that my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. But when I saw the image, it took everything I had to refrain from sprinting upstairs and going home for the day. My phone screen displayed an image of the hole leading into a small tunnel, which soon opened into a good-sized room below the basement. There were no doors or windows that I could see, and as far as I could guess, the only way in or out of that room was through the hole in the floor. hundreds of what appeared to be needles poked out from the walls and ceiling. A few reached up into the hole, which is how I must have cut my hand. Just as I was trying to think of a place I could go to get about 6 tetanus shots, I noticed that the large mass on the floor, covered in that gray slime, was actually composed of hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny creatures. They were the same color as the gray mucus, and had 2 stubby arms and 3 spindly legs that looked more like tendrils. Each one had a wide mouth full of rows of teeth that bore an unsettling resemblance to the needles coming out of the walls. I showed Jack when he came back down. We grabbed more chairs than was safe to carry up a flight of stairs and hauled ass out of the basement. We showed our friends the picture, which was then circulated throughout most of the school, and rumors about the room beneath the basement ran wild in the halls. For weeks, I was plagued with recurring nightmares about the hole in the floor. It was always the same. I would find myself in the room of the basement, having lost the keys. It played out almost exactly the same way as it did in real life. Except, when I reached into the hole for the keyring, my hand was yanked inside. I was laying on the concrete, shoulder deep into the room beneath the basement, screaming as millions of needle teeth gnashed the flesh on my arm, ripping muscle and skin roughly from the bone. The nightmare was horrifying, but on the nights when it seemed the most real, I often awoke to find small needle marks on my body. I had this dream for months, and it was really starting to get to me. I began to see more holes in various places in the school. The needles in these reached almost to the mouth of the opening, and I didn't need to look inside to know what I would find. It would be another sea of those writhing monsters within. Graduation couldn't come fast enough. While I was packing for college, I found one of those holes in the wall of my closet. I covered it with a whole roll of duct tape and nailed a piece of plywood over it for good measure. I went to college in St. Louis. Moving halfway across the country helped a lot. It put my mind at ease. When I visited at home for Christmas, the hole in my closet had been plastered shut and painted over, leading me to believe it was just a normal hole my frightened mind had convinced me was something more. I live in St. Louis now, and have been adjusting to life in the real world pretty well. Just got a job I really enjoy, seem to be succeeding at it, and I'm planning on proposing to my girlfriend soon. I had chalked up the holes to stress and paranoia. I had several new phones since then and haven't been able to find that picture again. Maybe my mind had exaggerated the whole thing. I was comfortable believing that whole ordeal could be explained by nightmares and anxiety. But when I was walking downtown today, I passed through an alley on my way home from a restaurant. There was something peeking out from behind a dumpster. It was a hole, leaking gray mucus, big enough for me to crawl into it. The hole on the side of the abandoned building in an older part of the city went down into the ground. Long, shiny needles peeked out from inside and shone in the moonlight. I sprinted all the way home, leaning on the wall to catch my breath. I felt something sharp poke into my back. And to my horror, I found a small hole beginning to form on the wall of my kitchen.
Welcome to Scary Story Time. I am your host, Spooky Boo, the mistress of midnight and goddess of the scares. It's almost time for Halloween, and do I have a treat for you? The Devil's Toybox is a perfect Halloween haunted house story. You will never want to see another amusement park ride again. Come and visit my Spooky Boo Secret Society Club, where you can listen to all of my shows, including many that are no longer available to the public. Just visit www.spookyboo.club and register for an account for just $5 per month, and you'll get access to commercial-free podcasts, a newsletter, and more. Now grab your glass of wine or your favorite security blanket and listen while you lean back and enjoy the show. The Devil's Toybox. The Devil's Toybox. The Devil's Toybox is an urban legend that Xavier horror fans will recognize as the inspiration for the infamous Lament configuration from Clive Barker's seminal Hellraiser series. Though in reality, the titular box is not a toy box at all, but rather a small room where the floor, the ceiling, and the walls are each composed of one giant mirror. According to the legend, if you stood inside this mirror room alone for too long, supposedly the devil would show up and steal your soul. In most versions of this story, he did so by flaying you alive. I mention all of this because about 2 weeks ago I got an email from an old friend, someone who was well versed in my sordid past, asking if I could help out their youngest sister, an 18-year-old girl, who we'll call Erin, located in northern Louisiana. The specific parish where Erin lived shall go unnamed for reasons that will soon become obvious. Like pretty much everywhere else, the place where Erin grew up had its own annual haunted house attraction that went up every October. The attraction was called Farmer Graves' Haunted Orchard, and in years past, it had been every bit as thrilling as the name suggested, which is not very. So for the previous Halloween, the owners decided to spice things up by building several new interactive installations, which included a windowless shack called the Devil's Toybox. This shack housed a small room composed of large-sized wall mirrors. That's how Erin heard it described anyway. She had never been inside the toy box herself. Farmer Graves closed less than a week after opening, after a result of the numerous people who had been hospitalized after going inside the Devil's Toybox attraction. Erin didn't get a chance to try out the box for herself before the closure, but she had heard countless stories about it from her classmates at school. Apparently no one could last longer than 5 minutes inside the room. There was even a large timer set up beside the building that showed the current occupant's length of stay, under a second clock displaying the longest recorded time up to that point, which maxed out at just over 45 minutes before the attraction finally closed. The man who managed to last that long, Roger Heltz, age 52, father of 3, had been reduced to a wide-eyed mute. To this day, he still hasn't said a word. One woman suffered a heart attack just after 90 seconds inside the box. A 17-year-old boy had to be dragged out kicking and screaming. The boy was from a nearby parish and hadn't gone to Erin's school, though her friend Celeste claimed her parents were friends with the boy's mom. They went to his funeral when he killed himself 2 weeks later. Whatever the truth of the matter, town officials were quick to act in getting Farmer Graves shut down. Of course, that didn't stop people from talking about the now infamous attraction, which they began to do almost immediately. For the next month or so, it seemed like the toy box was the only thing on anyone's mind. It had become the stuff of legend, and of course, it didn't take long for the local kids to start venturing out to the orchard at night to see the box for themselves. Farmer Graves's haunted orchard was owned by a middle-aged couple named Will and Darlene Sawyer. When the town council ordered the Sawyers to shut the place down, they were so pissed about the ruling, they left most of the attractions still standing, including the Devil's Toybox. The actual orchard was on a plot of land located at the rear of the Sawyers' property and was only accessible by a narrow 2-lane dirt road. One night, several seniors at Aaron's school snuck out to the Sawyers' property on a dare and claimed they found the Toybox's entrance padlocked. But then Will Sawyer showed up out of nowhere and asked them if they wanted to go inside. Will's sudden arrival had startled the young men, but once they realized that he wasn't mad at them for trespassing, and in fact seemed genuinely happy to see them, the guys decided to take him up on his offer to have a go inside the box. Of course, they chickened out as soon as Will unlocked the door, and it seemed to swing open on its own, like a hungry mouth at the sight of food. That's how the rumors about midnight screenings of the Devil's Toybox began to circulate. Most people who ventured out there afterwards claimed they encountered Will Sawyer after waiting beside the Toybox for an unspecified length of time. A few even said that they went inside the box, but these claims were always dismissed as bullshit. No one came out of that box that was coherent enough to talk about it. Last week, Aaron's boyfriend, Troy, went out there with some of his idiot friends, and Aaron hadn't seen him since. His parents reported him missing, and Aaron even told the cops about the rumors surrounding the toy box, but they barely seemed to be listening. Now, Aaron was going crazy worrying about Troy, and of course she was hoping I would be intrigued enough by her story to come with her to investigate Farmer Graves, because she was too scared to do so by herself. Aaron's location was only a 3-hour drive from New Orleans, so I asked my friend Jason and his girlfriend Gretchen to take the ride with me. This way I wouldn't feel so weird about driving all that way to see an 18-year-old girl I didn't know. We rolled into town about 5 p.m. that Saturday and met up with Aaron at the McDonald's, as she called it. I laughed when I first heard her say that and immediately felt like an asshole for thinking it was funny that Aaron's town had only one McDonald's. Our meet and greet started a little awkward on account of all the stares we were getting from the rest of the restaurant. Then, again, 4 strangers driving into town to meet a teenage girl at the McDonald's will do that. Thankfully, Gretchen was there to diffuse the situation with one simple question. "Did you make that?" She was pointing at Aaron's backpack, which was actually a stuffed doll that I recognized as Lumpy Space Princess from the cartoon Adventure Time, only most of the stuffing had been removed and a purple pouch had been sewn into it that sealed closed with a matching purple zipper. The straps were made out of old retro-looking seatbelts. Aaron nodded and Gretchen's jaw dropped. "Oh my God, will you make me one?" "Will you make me 2? Gretchen asked. "Sure, as long as you provide the supplies," Aaron said, laughing. "Deal." Gretchen was grinning ear to ear as she turned to face me. "You have to help this girl so she can make me tiny, adorable backpacks." It was a little after 10 p.m. when we neared the end of the narrow dirt road that led to Farmer Graves' haunted orchard. We parked beside a tall wooden archway that designated the orchard's front entrance. I handed out flashlights from the small stash of them in my trunk, and then we started inside. The place looked about how I expected it to. A row of brightly colored plywood shacks lined with a vacant field beside several rows of satsuma trees that had been covered in fake cobwebs and scary decorations. Each shack had a sign displaying the name of a different attraction. There was Horn Toss, which, judging from the illustration on its side, was a ring toss game where you tried to throw halos onto a demon's horns. Werewolf Bowling, which was anyone's guess, and my personal favorite, The Exorcist, which was a mounted squirt gun game that had several wood cutouts of Linda Blair's face as its targets. Cartoon water tanks were painted below each of the mounted squirt guns that were labeled Holy Water. The Devil's Toybox was the last shack in the row. It was painted a bright fire engine red, and at the door, which made up one entire wall of the small structure, was padlocked shut. Someone had stacked a dozen or so rusted folding chairs against the side of the toy box. Erin grabbed one of the chairs and began to unfold it as she said, "Now we wait." "How long?" Gretchen asked. "It varies, but hopefully not forever." Erin motioned at the thick patch of wilderness to our left, and I turned to see a window glowing out there in the distant darkness. "See it? That's the Sawyer's house. They must know we're here." "And that's a good thing?" Gretchen's tone was tense, and she had a look on her face that she'd just realized how much she didn't want to be doing any of this. Before Erin or I could answer, she turned to Jason and asked, "Baby, will you walk me back to the car?" Jason gave her an irritated look. "What? Why?" "Because all of this just got too real. You knew what we were coming out here to do. I explained it to you in vivid detail." "Jason, please." "No, it's bullshit, Gretch. You do this every time." "I know." This is the fucking Avengers sneak preview all over again. I miss everything cool. "I'm sorry." She batted her eyes as she gave Jason an adorable frown that she had honed over many years of getting her way. Jason let out an exasperated sigh, and I handed him the keys to the car. "I'll be right back," Jason muttered. I pulled out a chair and took a seat next to Erin as we watched the beams from Jason and Gretchen's flashlights shrink off into the darkness. A thought came to me just then, as if this didn't really resemble an episode of Scooby-Doo. Now we're splitting up. That's just asking for it. As soon as the words crossed my mind, we heard the crunch of approaching footsteps. Erin and I stood in unison and exchanged a panicked glance before turning to face the forest bordering the orchard. A middle-aged man with long, scraggly hair emerged out of the darkness and into range of our flashlights. He was holding an electric lantern and wearing an open bathrobe over a dirty white undershirt and sweatpants. Will Sawyer was basically Vincent Price if he had starred in The Big Lebowski. He smiled and gave us a thumbs up as he said, "You here for the box?" "Sort of," Erin responded, and Will gave her a look. He had no idea what that could possibly mean. "Have you seen this guy?" I held up the photo of Troy that Erin had texted to my phone. As Will started to approach us, he squinted at the picture. "Maybe," he said. "When was that?" "A few weeks ago. He was the one that went in the box. Most won't go inside anymore. Lasted about 3 minutes, and he ran off screaming." Erin let out a sharp gasp. "Ran off? Ran off where?" Will pointed a thumb back at the dark patch of wilderness behind him and replied, "Into the fucking woods. Where do you think?" I opened that door, and he came shouting out, dick flapping naked from the waist down. He had his boxers on his head and his pants wrapped around his neck like a scarf. It was honestly pretty funny. Erin covered her mouth with her hand as her eyes began to well with tears. Will grinned and said, "You want to see inside?" "We aren't here for the box," I said, stepping in front of Erin and glaring at Will. "But it's so breathtaking," the man said as he gestured toward the toy box's wide door, which slowly swung open. The interior was shrouded in darkness, but I could still see something vaguely human-shaped moving around inside the box. Yeah, fuck that. "Run!" I grabbed Erin by the arm and pulled her along with me as I sprinted from the toy box. I could hear something chasing after us as we ran back toward the orchard's entrance, and I say something because it certainly didn't sound like a person. What I heard weren't footsteps, but rather one long scraping sound accompanied by a wet breathing that reminded me of a panting dog. Thankfully, Jason heard me screaming just as he and Gretchen reached my car. They turned to spot me and Erin running towards them with identical expressions of pants-shitting terror. Jason must have caught a glimpse of the thing chasing after us too, because his own face went pale. He quickly unlocked my door and threw himself behind the wheel, screaming for Gretchen to get in. She hurried into the passenger seat, and the moment she buckled her seatbelt, He started the engine and accelerated toward us, closing the gap in a matter of moments. Jason slammed on the brakes as he neared the car and screeched to a halt inches away from us. I went to open the back passenger door, but it was locked. So was Aaron's side. I banged my fist on the window and pointed down at the locking mechanism. Jason mouthed, "Oh, shit." He turned and scanned the door controls on the driver's side, looking for the master switch. The scraping sound was growing closer, but I refused to look back and banged on the window once more. A frustrated Jason finally leaned into the back seat and unlocked the door manually, but by then it already had me. I can remember something dragging me back through the woods. I wasn't aware of much else beyond the vague impression that I had been stung by an insect with some kind of paralytic venom. I felt a rush of air hit my face as the door swung shut in front of me. Then the lights came on, and I realized where I was, inside the devil's toy box. The room's construction was actually pretty impressive. The floor was a thick sheet of transparent plexiglass layered over a mirror identical to the ones that made up the ceiling and walls. With the door shut, the mirror on its other side was just as seamless as the rest. Thin fluorescent bulbs ran between the crevices where each mirror met the next, washing the room and its endless reflections in a pale yellow light. I made the mistake of looking down at the chasm of reflections down below me and almost fainted. I shut my eyes and held out my hands, feeling for the nearest wall. I leaned against it while trying to force my head to stop spinning. Someone was whispering my name. Joel. I opened my eyes to see my reflection smiling at me as it said, "You're his now." I let out a startled scream and backed away from the mirror I was leaning against. Something was moving around behind my reflection. It was hard to see what it was at first, but something was climbing up through the corridor of my reflections, making its way toward me. As it got closer, I saw that the something was me. Well, not exactly. Its features were too blurred, as if this reflection of me had been so far back that its face had been reduced to a distorted mess. That was the Joel that was coming for me. I began to bang on the entrance wall, which felt padlocked into place. I let out a frustrated scream and finally turned to face the thing coming for me, only to find that my reflections had returned to normal. There was no longer a blurry me in the mirror. I let out a reflexive sigh of relief. A beat later, it emerged from the mirror beneath me and grabbed onto my legs. I woke up screaming and Aaron shot me a panicked look. We were seated outside of the toy box. "Sorry, I must have nodded off," I said. Aaron opened her mouth. She hesitated before replying. "I'm worried about your friends." I rubbed my eyes. "Why? How long have they been gone?" "A while. Almost 30 minutes. I pulled out my phone to check the time, confirming what Aaron had said. I sighed. "Guess we should go check on them." As Aaron and I started on the path back towards the entrance to the orchard, I nodded in the direction of the Sawyer house. "You think he's going to show?" I asked. Aaron thought about it for a moment and nodded. "I hope so. If not, I don't know what I'll do." I glanced at her, worried that Aaron was about to start crying, but the look on her face was one of stoic acceptance. Just as I realized that I was staring at her, Aaron looked up at me and we exchanged a moment of awkward eye contact. I smiled to try and play it off as I quickly faced forward. It was then that I realized we had lost our way in the dark and somehow ended up at the dense patch of woods that bordered the orchard. How the hell? I scanned the surrounding wilderness with my flashlight trying to get my bearings, but I couldn't locate the orchard or any of its accompanying structures in the darkness. Then, after a bit of what I thought had been backtracking, we found ourselves at the footsteps of the Sawyer house. It was a rustic white 2-story, 3 if you counted its 6-foot elevated flood-proof foundation, similar to a lot of the homes in the area. The space beneath the porch was unlit and pitch black, yet staring into it, I could have sworn I saw movement under there as Aaron gestured at the house. "Guess we might as well say hi," she said. Aaron started up the front stairs before I could even begin to mention the many ways in which that might be a bad idea, and without hesitation she knocked on the front door. Shit, I muttered to myself and hurried up the stairs to stand beside her. There was a tense beat of silence, and then from the inside came the sound of footsteps across hardwood floor. The door was suddenly yanked open, and a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen was standing there, glaring at us. This must have been Darlene. "You here for the box?" she said. I experienced a moment of intense déjà vu as Aaron replied, "Sort of." Darlene leaned outside and glanced around. "You better come in, then." Aaron and I exchanged a cautious look as the woman turned and started back inside, leaving the front door open behind her. Aaron responded with a shrug and said, "Fuck it," and then entered the house. As I followed her in and shut the door, I heard something rustling in the bushes outside. "Lock it, please. There's shit all in these woods," Darlene said. The rustling sound grew louder as I turned the deadbolt, and it slid home with an ominous thunk. We followed Darlene into a den that reeked of weed as she gestured to a half-smoked blunt burning away in the ashtray. "Help yourself," she said, gesturing to the blunt. She took a seat on the sofa and muted the large flat-screen TV mounted to the wall in front of her. "Now, how can I help you?" I cleared my throat and replied, "We were told to expect a Will Sawyer. Is he coming?" "He killed himself last night, so probably not." "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I said. "Yeah, so how can I help you?" "Well," I held up my phone and showed her Troy's picture. "We were wondering if you remember seeing this guy at the orchard recently," I said. Darlene examined the photo. "Not that I recall, but I never went out there much after the incident with the Toybox. It's my fault that the godforsaken room got built in the first place, and every time I see the thing I want to fucking cry," she said. Erin tilted her head, her tone curious when she asked, "It was your idea to build the Devil's Toy Box?" Darlene slowly shook her head. "No, I was sick, like really sick, and that demon or whatever Willie summoned told him he would make me better if we built a room of mirrors and got people to go inside it. If your friend went in there, I can tell you one of three things happened. He's either dead, catatonic in a hospital, or out in those woods. The ones that end up out there, something happens to them, like when a pig gets loose and grows tusks. But if it'll help, you're welcome to look for him here." "Here, as in your house?" Aaron asked. "Yeah," Darlene stood, slid her coffee table out of the way, and pulled the rug aside to reveal a crude hatch cut into the hardwood floor. "Will brought a few of the ones that went back in home. I think he felt sorry for them. Anyway, he kept them down here." "You got a flashlight?" I returned the nod and handed it to her. She switched on the light and aimed it down at the open hatch, revealing the upturned faces of 4 naked, emaciated men. "Any of them look familiar?" One of the men hissed at us. There was more rustling sounds from outside, and then something began to scratch at the living room window. Darlene glanced at the window and she said, "You've got them riled up tonight. How long were you two out there?" Before I could respond, a filthy hand with impossibly long fingers reached up and yanked me down through the trap door. I woke up screaming. I was sitting outside the toy box, and Jason was sitting beside me. He gave me a sideways look and said, "You okay?" "Yeah, bad dream, sorry." I was still reeling from my nightmare within a nightmare. As I glanced around, something felt off. "Where are the girls?" "What girls?" "The girls! One of them being your girlfriend Gretchen. Dude, Gretchen broke up with me like a month ago, remember? Or is this something you're doing for your story?" "My what?" "The story you're going to write about this. You're fudging the details, which you probably should. You're going to make up some fake reason why we're out here, too. Some damsel in distress who needs you to investigate a derelict Halloween attraction. It's definitely a lot better than saying your depressed friend, who asked you to drive you 3 hours out to see some rundown shack in the middle of the night where nothing whatsoever happened, and then your friend shot himself? What? Jason slid the barrel of the handgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. I was sitting close enough that the shot rendered me temporarily deaf. I stood and slowly backed away, my gaze fixed on the crater of blood, the viscera that had been my friend's head mere moments ago, my own head ringing like a goddamn church bell from the large caliber handgun going off next to it. Still, I couldn't look away. Finally, I forced myself to turn and watch where I was going so that I could hurry up and get the fuck out of there. As I started toward the entrance, I glanced back once more to give my dead friend a final parting glance and halted when I saw that he wasn't there. Jason's blood and brains were still splattered across the front of the toy box, so I assumed that meant I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But the folding chair where he had been sitting was now void of his slumped, lifeless body. As I stood there trying to figure out where Jason's corpse could have gone, a string of stagnant, smelling water splattered across the side of my face. I turned to see Jason's mostly headless body draped over one of the Exorcist Games mounted water guns. I'm not exactly proud to admit this, but I froze when I saw him, thinking that Jason had gone full-on undead zombie. Though, after almost a minute of me standing there waiting for him to make the next move, I finally realized that wasn't going to happen. What I was seeing was nothing more than a dead body lying on a mounted water gun, which meant that someone or something was out there in the darkness, moving around a 160-pound corpse and propping it up on shit simply to fuck with me. This was a realization that finally sent me running. I was in my 91 Jeep Cherokee and halfway down the unpaved dirt road back to the highway when the Cherokee hit a bump that dislodged something from its undercarriage. I pulled over and started to get out so I could take a look at what it had been, and that's when I realized I was once again looking at Jason's mangled body. Moving a grown man's corpse is one thing, but moving it and then wedging it up into a car's undercarriage and the time it took me to get back to my Jeep, that's crazy talk. I really don't like to give this part much thought because the truth of it is kind of depressing. Real life Jason had been really depressed about the breakup with Gretchen, and I guess I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. And so I went back home and started to write it all down, just as Jason knew I would. I got about this far when I was interrupted by a knock on the door to my apartment. I opened the door and saw there was a note taped to the outside. "There's a package for you in the lobby," it said. It was about 11 p.m., and I was pretty sure that the management of my complex had long since gone home for the evening, but I headed toward the lobby anyway, out of sheer curiosity. I stared down at the steps leading to the first door of my complex to see Jason's mutilated body leaning against a Coke machine at the bottom of the stairwell. Somehow they had found me. I vaulted back up the stairs, seeing everything in slow motion as I sprinted to my apartment and locked the door. A moment later, the knob began to rattle as someone tried to turn it from outside. I was slowly backing away from the door when something big crashed into it, though it was no longer my front door, but rather the inside wall of the toy box that suddenly buckled inward to reveal a familiar set of headlights. Jason had crashed my Cherokee into the side of the toy box. I spent 25 seconds inside the Devil's Toy Box. That's how long it took for Jason to run my car into it. Thankfully, the Cherokee was still drivable afterward, and we promptly got the fuck out of there. I dropped Erin off at her house with an apology, explaining there was nothing else I could do. Honestly, I don't know what she expected from me. This isn't supernatural. If your boyfriend is missing, you call the cops. I'm going home. Do I feel bad that I couldn't help her? Sure. But for what it's worth, we disabled the toy box and probably saved countless generations of dumb kids from making the same mistake as Erin's boyfriend. The bad news is that doing so has almost certainly scarred me for life. Even as I sit here days later, writing all of this down for the second time, I'm still worried that it's not over. I'm worried that when I wake up tomorrow, it's going to be in front of that goddamn box.